This is the Financially Simple Podcast, the show dedicated to destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner. The content in the show is for informational purposes only. This show is not investment advice. Instead, seek help from a competent financial advisor or conduct your own due diligence. Justin Goodbread, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Heritage Investors, a registered investment advisor only conducting business in states where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Registration is not an endorsement of the firm by securities regulators and does not mean the advisor has achieved a specific level of skill or ability. Here's your host, pizza-loving, certified financial planner, Justin Goodbread.
And welcome back to the Financially Simple Podcast. Today we are going to answer a question. This is a question that I have received more than perhaps any other question in my almost 19 years now of being a financial planner. Since 2006, I've been a certified financial planner, and I have dealt with this question from various different approaches. The topic of today's conversation is, what type of mortgage should a business owner have? Now, I asked that question, what type of mortgage should a business owner have? Because that's the easiest way I can set up my ultimate answer. Now, I've heard that question asked various ways. I've heard, hey, Justin, how much should I put down on my house? Hey, Justin, should I finance 100% of my mortgage or not? Justin, should I move the money from my current house equity to the next house? Justin, should I use a government-assisted style closing cost mortgage? And the questions could continue a number of different ways. So in order to answer the simple question, what type of mortgage should a business owner have? I have to give you some education, some just basic, rudimentary financial education that you're going to say, well, that makes sense. Yeah, it does. And when we line or when we stack each of these points on top of another, the ultimate answer to that question, what type of mortgage should a business owner have, you may disagree with me, and that's okay. That's okay. In fact, I'm going to tell you up front, I disagree with myself. But I'm not here to offer my opinion. I guess at some point I am. I'm here to offer you more financial technicalities and explain financially my answers. So without further ado, what type of mortgage should a business owner have? First thing we have to realize is the house does not care if there's a mortgage or not. The house doesn't care. The house is an asset. Well, some people would say it's not an asset, but for this purpose today, we're going to call it an asset. An asset is something which appreciates in value over time. You're hoping that when you buy this house or when the house that you purchase, you're hoping that it's going to appreciate in value over time, or else you wouldn't have bought it more than likely. No, you'd have probably just rented the house. So if you have a house that you paid $100, $200, $300, $1 million for this house, you're anticipating a return on your investment. So the house is going to appreciate or sometimes depreciate in value with or without a mortgage. It doesn't care if there's a mortgage. It doesn't care if it's a 5-year mortgage, a 10-year mortgage, a 30, a 15, an ARM. It doesn't care if you paid 100% down or if you paid 0 down. The house does not care, because the house is going to appreciate in value as it will appreciate. So I have done lots of videos on mortgages. One of the mortgages videos I have, they're actually quoted that houses historically appreciate between 3 to 5%. That's a rough estimate depending on which research firm you read behind. So houses, residential real estate, will typically appreciate. Now, there have been times in the past where houses have not appreciated in a year. I can think specifically about 2007, 8, and 9. Man, houses got blistered, and certain parts of the country experienced the same downturn, if not greater, than that of the stock market during those time periods. So long story short, though, we could come to the simple probably agreement that the house that you want to purchase or the house that you have purchased, you're anticipating that it will appreciate in value. Thus, you wouldn't have bought it. So you're anticipating it will appreciate. The second point that we have to deal with is if the house is going to appreciate in value, you are going to build equity. You're going to build equity. Well, Justin, that's common sense. That's right. It's common sense. It doesn't do you any good to pay off the house in a faster manner. And we're going to come to that. If the idea is that you need to have equity in your house, then the house, through time and through duration of holding a mortgage, by purpose of the asset or by virtue of the asset, it will generate its own equity. If it wasn't capable of generating its own equity, you shouldn't have bought it. Go back to point number one. You are anticipating, as well as I, that the real estate we have purchased, the residential real estate, will appreciate over time. It doesn't do us any good to take our cash and put it in the house in a faster manner just so it'll build equity. It's going to do that just through time. So that's the second point I want to drive home. The third point I want to drive home is the interest rate on a mortgage is usually the cheapest money that you will have access to. What do I mean? In a mortgage in America right now, you can find rates anywhere between the 2% to 6% range. I actually am working with a client that has just qualified for a 2% mortgage. And I'm also dealing with an individual who's looking at just over a 5.5% mortgage. So let's round that up to say 6. So in the United States, and this is the year 2019, mortgages are between the average of 2 to 6%. Probably most of them falling in that 4 to 5% range. Now, there have been times in the United States where mortgages were in the high teens. In fact, my parents' first house they purchased was in excess of 15% interest on their house. And that was common at that point. Perhaps you talked to your parents, or perhaps you know someone, or perhaps you yourself purchased a house way back in the 80s, and you can remember interest rates being in the teens. But relatively speaking, mortgages are typically some of the cheapest monies that you'll have access to. If we realize that mortgages fall between the 2 to 6% range, then the same time period currently in the United States, you can access a credit card that has interest rates on average between 14 to 24%. Of course, there are some 0% interest rates out there, and there are some people that have exceptional credit that's getting that 7% or 6% interest rate. But for the most part, credit cards are typically ranging between 19 to 24%, with the average falling in that 14 range. So credit cards are a little bit more expensive than mortgage. You're not going to use a credit card to go buy a house. It's just not going to happen. Now, while mortgages fall currently between that 2 to 6% range, investments, one could argue, fall between 6, 7, 8, or 9, or 10, or 11, or 12, or 14, or whatever return on investment you want to account for. I personally believe that a 6 to 8% equity return is fair. There are some in the internet world, and there are some on the mass media who get on radios and pronounce 10 to 12% as a possible return on investments long term. I know the S&P 500 has yielded almost 10% at this particular point long term. So I realize that investments can yield a variety of rates. But for the most part, let's say for a conservative or a reasonable assumption that investments could yield 6 to 8%. That means if we can borrow money at 6%, the high rate on the mortgage, and invest money and get an 8, 9, 10% high rate on a stock investment, then the mortgage is truly some of the cheapest money that you can have access to. The fourth point that we want to deal with here is this. Mortgage payments get easier over time. Mortgage payments get easier over time. Now, in a vacuum, we would think, my goodness, the mortgage is going to be X number of thousands per month. But over time, we have this enemy which can hurt us, or this friend who can help us, called inflation. In fact, in my YouTube video, The $1 Million Difference, which has now hit tons and tons, almost over 1 million hits on it, I reflect how a payment, a mortgage payment of $1,193 per month in today's dollars, after 10 years will only feel like $970. And after 20 years, it'll only feel like $758. And amazingly, after 30 years, it will only feel like $536 per month. I actually have clients who laugh at their ridiculously low house payments. They've lived in these houses now for 20, 30 years. And what a payment seems so small, $200, $300, $400 a month to me, they reminisce that back when they first purchased the house, that payment seemed monstrous. Now, if mortgage payments get easier over time, then the opposite would be true, that your income is going to increase over time. So currently, roughly $1,193 today, after 10 years, would be roughly $1,459, just assuming basic inflation rates. After 20 years, it'd be $1,856. You just received almost a $700 pay increase over a 20-year period of time just by cost of living adjustments. And amazingly, after 30 years of time, your current income, just assuming inflation, not any improvements in your life, would be almost $1,400 more for $2,648. So your mortgage payments get easier over time. So those are the first 4 points, and now's where it gets fun.
You're listening to the Financially Simple Podcast. Show your support by subscribing to this and our other educational business channels at financiallysimple.com.
Large mortgages let you invest more money faster. I was illustrating this to the intern in our office. His name is Reed, and we were talking about one of the things that his economics professor in high school was touting, along with a very popular radio talk show host, about you need to pay as much down on the house as possible. And I took a client who had a question. The question was, Justin, I'm ready to upgrade our house. We have a $425,000 house that currently has $75,000 in debt on it. So we have some equity. I have $350,000 in equity. We want to buy a $600,000 house. How do we do it? So now this is a business owner, and their current net worth is about $2 million. And so to afford a $600,000 house with their income is easily attainable based on their income and their assets. But yet we wanted to look at a principle, and that is a large mortgage allows you to invest more money faster. So we took this example, and I began teaching Reed mathematically why this makes sense, why a large mortgage actually allows you to invest more money faster. So we gave 2 examples. The first example we had, and we'll have all this detailed, this math on the blog, financiallysimple.com, but we'll have the math there, and you can feel free to click in the show notes. One of our team members now is adding a link to the blog post, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this on Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're at listening to this. Feel free to click on the show notes, and you can actually get a link directly to the blog post. We're working on that right now because a lot of people are asking, man, Justin, I want to see the links. So in this particular episode, I want you to go look at the blog. On the blog, I'm going to have the outline for what I'm presenting here. I'm going to have the detailed screenshots of my planning software. And you're fixing to be amazed. In fact, whenever I showed this to young Reed, his mouth fell, and he goes, I don't think my economics professor counted on all those different things. I think he was using very simple math. So here's the deal. The client asked, Justin, should I sell my house, take my $350,000 in equity that I'm going to receive at the closing table, buy the new house, move my $350,000 of equity onto the new home, and then get a mortgage for the remaining balance? Sounds fair enough. And in fact, that's a common piece of advice that I've heard over the years from novice financial individuals. Now, there's maybe a time whenever that makes sense, but mathematically, here are the numbers. If this individual took their equity of $350,000 and applied it to a $600,000 new house, they would have a mortgage of roughly $250,000. I say rough because you may have closing costs, et cetera, and all this. But we ran an example with a 30-year fixed mortgage at a 5% interest rate, and a payment on that would be roughly $1,342 per month. Now, here's the interesting fact. This individual is 38 years old. They want to retire at age 54. So we're only talking a short period of time. And at age 54, they want to travel the world. Now, many people would say, well, if that's the case, let's go out and get a 15-year mortgage and let's pay it off a lot faster. Here's the reality. Their present value of their net worth at their retirement age, assume retirement age of 54 years old, it's anticipated to be about $7.7 million. Let's call it 7.8 and round up. So after 17 years, their portfolio value would be 7.8 million. Let's say that for audio purposes. Again, check out the blog and I'll have the actual spreadsheets here you can look at. Now, where it gets interesting is after 30 years, okay, whenever they now have pushed themselves up into that 78 range, their net worth would be $5.2 million. So not bad. Not bad. Now, if we contrast, and again, there's going to be a detailed spreadsheet you can look at, the typical analysis of take our equity out of our home, roll it into our next house, and minimize our mortgage or pay it off as fast as possible. If we contrast that and we do the total opposite, let's say we sell the house and we only move $120,000 or 20% down. There's a lot of reasons for 20%. Mostly it gets out of PMI insurance. But let's say we move $120,000 down and we invest $230,000. So now, in my second example, this client would have a mortgage balance of $480,000 a year. $480,000. And they would have a payment of $2,500 a month. It's actually $2,577. Here's the reality. Apples to apples. Cash flow hasn't moved. Their savings hasn't changed in this particular case. The taxes are all the same. Inflation's all factored in. Everything is constant in the projections of the client software, except for the fact that we're now going to only place $120,000 down the house. We're going to have a higher monthly payment, and we're going to invest $230,000. We're actually going to move that into their current investment portfolio. At their consequent age of 54, they are projected to have a balance of $8,113,000. That is almost $200,000 more than had they paid the house off in full. You say, well, Justin, if they pay the house off in full and they get it paid for, then their savings rate will help increase their net worth. Nope. I've got it all factored into the program. It doesn't. Well, Justin, they'll avoid the interest payment. True, but they'll still have $200,000 less in net worth come age 54 over a 17-year period. More astounding is now after 30 years, whereas they had 5.2 million, let's call it 5.25 million. Now they're going to have 5.83 million after 30 years. So now we're dealing with almost $500,000 more in disposable assets after 30 years, all because they did not place all of their money from the sale of their first house until the sale of the second house. Friends, I don't know how to explain it any simpler than that. But just in case you aren't 100% with me, let's drive it home. Number 6, a large mortgage can create opportunity for you to build more wealth. It does this by creating a spread between your potential asset growth rates and your liability growth rates, which help you increase your wealth. So I'm going to try to walk you through audibly a chart that we will have again on the blog, financiallysimple.com. Again, check in the show notes or check in the YouTube description to see a link to the blog so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm printing off directly out of my planning software, which includes every type of a calculation you can bring together. I'm printing off this data for you to look at. Here's the reality. We know that a house doesn't appreciate any more or less if it has debt. So let's say we have a $600,000 house in my client's case, and it earns 3% a year, which is $18,000 a year in growth. If it was fully paid for, they would only have an $18,000 appreciation. In the very first year, I wanted to make this as ugly as I possibly can, just to say, aha, give you an aha moment. If they took out the debt of $480,000 at a 5% interest rate, which, by the way, they'll qualify for much lower, then in the first year, the appreciation on the house is only $18,000, yet the liability payments, principal and interest, PIPI, is going to be $24,000. So we are losing $6,000 year one. And if we invest the $230,000, as I aforementioned, into an investment account that makes 8%, we're only making $18,400. So in the very first year, where the house that's paid for would appreciate at $18,000, the house that's not paid for and has an investment account is actually only appreciating at $12,400. However, as we mentioned in point number 2, inflation can drive some serious benefit to you. Understanding the way compound interest works with inflation. After 17 years of this mathematical calculations, the business owner, by having a large mortgage, would have $334,000 more net worth than by taking the $350,000 from the sale of the house and putting it toward the purchase of the new house. After 30 years, they'd have $574,000 more net worth. We'll put a graph in the blog for you to see that. Number 7, and this is perhaps the single largest thing that I can describe to you on the reason that I'm going to recommend ultimately a big mortgage. And that is this. Having a large mortgage gives you more flexibility and more liquidity. In 2007, you've heard me talk about this, the market fell drastically. In 2007, my wife and I had our house paid for. We were sitting just on about $300,000 of assets in addition to a paid for house. We used a home equity line of credit to go in and borrow all of the money and the equity out of our house in 2007, just because I wanted to have some flexibility. And 2007 was the beginning of the downturn of the stock market. We were sitting with about $500,000 of equity. In 2008 and 9, the market fell drastically and income for planners fell drastically as well. In 2009, I began dealing with a lawsuit that I was both a plaintiff and a defendant on that ultimately settled. Had my house been paid for, there would have been no assets whatsoever that I could have dealt with to deal with that lawsuit. I couldn't have presented my case in this particular lawsuit. Having cash on hand is king. And the individuals who place a significant amount of money down on their house, whenever life happens, many times can't get to the money. Because in order to get the money out of the house, you have to sell the house or borrow the money. And if you're ultimately going to have to turn around and borrow the money, why would you give the money to the bank to only have to cowtail back to them to borrow the money back out? It makes no sense. Payments are not required if you lose your job. You can work with the bank. What I ended up doing during that time period is working with the bank and was able to agree upon a lower payment while I dealt with life. Banks don't care if you lose your job. If you lose your job or fall on hard times, you may be forced to sell your house. However, if you had liquid cash, you would not. And number 8, you may qualify for a tax deduction. Depending on your adjusted gross income, the standard deduction this year is $24,400. On Schedule A, if you have greater than the standard deduction, the interest that you pay on your house could be tax deductible. Could be. So what is the answer to the question? How do I answer the question whenever I'm dealing with clients? Hey, Justin, what type of mortgage should a business owner have? Hey, Justin, how much should I put down on my house? Hey, Justin, and the list goes on and on. In the last few episodes I dealt with, you need to have the smallest house feasibly possible for you to fulfill your dreams and desires. And when I'm talking about small, I'm not talking about size small, I'm talking about price purchase point small. So you need to have the smallest price purchase point possible for you to hit your dreams and desires. That's number 1. Number 2, you need to have the largest mortgage possible at the longest duration possible for you to hit your dreams and desires. I personally like a fixed 30-year mortgage. I like that. It's fair. It's competitive. I realize there's some 40-year mortgages out there now, but I like the fixed 30-year mortgage. The interest rates are fair and competitive. I'm not a fan of ARMs. I'm not a fan of 15-year mortgages. I'm just not, because the math doesn't support it. And at this point, if you fall into a certain camp of certain radio personalities, you may have said, Justin, you've lost your rocker. Haven't you heard this? Haven't you heard that? Look, I understand all the arguments. I read every book out there on the subject, and I also do this on a daily basis for clients. One thing that I am not in a position to do is to give my opinion when it relates to a client's factual matters. I wish I could, but this is facts. The facts state that if you carry a large mortgage with the lowest down payment possible, you have the ability to build net worth faster, hands down. So my answer to the question is this. How big of a mortgage should you have? The largest and the longest possible. Guys, I referenced a lot of Financially Simple this time. While you're on the blog checking out the graphs, I mean, you're going to be amazed. When I showed Reed these things, he's like, dude, I didn't realize they all work together and it created that much of a difference. Like, yeah, man, it creates that much of a difference. So when you're checking this out on the blog, hey, be sure you sign up for the newsletter. I give some of my best writing and best examples in our newsletter. It's right there on the blog. You can see it on the right-hand side. Hey, sign up for the newsletter. And I had this question actually come started on a Twitter discussion that I wasn't involved in. Somebody tagged me and I wanted to deal with it. And I felt like it was a good time to deal with this. Look, I say it every week. Life is hard. It is. Life is good and life can be frustrating. Money doesn't have to be. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Hey, y'all go out and make it a great day.
You've been listening to the Financially Simple podcast. For more business and personal financial help and information, head over to financiallysimple.com today.